There was a line Conrad Ashby cut from his first play on the eve of its return to the stage. A face in a crowd, a child looking up at him, a moment of pure, unguarded feeling he could neither explain nor forget. When his son asked him why he had cut it, Conrad said it belonged to a different play. He was telling the truth. It belonged to this one. He had been saving it, the way he saved everything that mattered to him, for the end. 24 years ago, before the fame, before any of it, there was a small theatre on a narrow street, and on its stage, the closing night of a play that had failed. You already know that Conrad Ashby gave up writing at 33. What you don't know is that 13 years later, the buried thing clawed its way back up. He couldn't have said why. He wrote one more play in the evenings, and he paid for its staging himself out of 13 years of transcribing other men's words. It was a play for one actor, and the actor was him. There was no money for anyone else, and besides, no one else would have said the words the way he needed them said. It was about a man who talks to an empty chair. The play had almost no plot. It had a table and 2 chairs and a ritual. Every evening of the man's life, he came home to the table, and before he did anything else, he set the second chair, drew it out an inch, angled it toward him, the way you set a chair for someone expected. Then he rested his hand on its back for a moment, as if in greeting, and then he sat down across from it, and he talked. About his day, about his work, about the small injustices and the smaller victories, the things you save up through the hours because there is someone at home who will want them. The man had saved them up his whole life. There had never once been anyone at home. The chair never answered. The man never stopped. That was the whole play. A life's worth of conversation delivered nightly to the one listener who had never left because it had never arrived. Conrad performed without acknowledging the few people scattered beyond the lights. He was not writing a character. For most of his life, the people he spoke to had been paying him, passing through, or waiting for him to finish. The loneliness in the play was not invented, it was transcribed. It ran for 9 performances. The few critics who came were brief and bored. On the 9th night, the house was a quarter full, and Conrad stood at the stage door afterward in the rain out of an old habit that no longer had any reason. Writers do this, actors do this. They stand at the door in case someone comes. Someone came, a family of 3, sheltering under one umbrella. The parents were kind in the way strangers are kind. A few warm, vague words, the sort you give a man whose evening you suspect has gone badly. And then the boy, 5 years old, small even for that, serious in the way small children are serious at late hours, let go of his mother's hand, walked up to Conrad and said, "I liked the man who talked to the chair." Conrad crouched down to him, slowly, the way you approach something you're afraid will startle, and said, "Why did you like him?" The boy thought about it with his whole face, the way children do. "Because nobody listened to him," he said, but he kept talking anyway. He had failed young and buried it, and failed once more, late, in the rain, in front of nobody, and a 5-year-old had just understood his work better than every critic in the city. "What's your name?" he asked. "Eli," said the boy. Then his mother called him and knelt to buckle his coat and took his hand, and the family went off down the narrow street under their one umbrella. Conrad remained beneath the stage door light until the street was empty. "24 years later, Eli Ashby woke in the dark with the memory of fire. He had woken this way all his life. He had never once called it a nightmare, because it wasn't one. It was the rescue, the first memory he had, the floor his entire life was built on. And it always came the same way. Not as a story, as pieces, a kitchen floor, black and white squares. His father's voice saying his name. Heat at his back, the scratch of dark wool against his cheek, a large hand cradling the back of his head, and the voice of the man who became his father, low and close, the only clear sound in the world. "Don't look, little one. I've got you. You're safe now." The pieces had never sat quite still, the order shifting each time, his father's voice least fixed of all, drifting through the memory as though it had no place of its own. Eli had stopped trying to order them years ago. Fire does that to memory, he'd been told by his father. 5-year-olds keep pieces, not stories. The story the pieces belonged to, the whole world knew. A fire on a quiet street, a little after midnight. Neighbors in their doorways, shouting, helpless. And a man, a stranger, a passerby. Someone said later they recognized him from the newspapers. Isn't that the playwright? Going in through the smoke when no one else would. He came out with a child pressed against his coat, one large hand cradling the back of the small head, holding the boy's face into the dark wool, away from the burning house, away from everything. The parents could not be saved. An old house, old wiring, a fire that had moved too fast. The boy had no grandparents living, no aunts, no uncles, and when months later, the celebrated playwright, the hero of that night, quietly petitioned to adopt the orphan whose life he had saved, the world did not ask a single question. The world wept. The world loves a story with a shape to it, and it will give that story anything it asks for. It was a true memory. Every detail of it was real. Remember it exactly as it was told to you. Eli was not lying awake because of the fire. He was lying awake because of a folder in a locked drawer in his father's desk. A stranger's years of patient work, every play matched to a real absence. And because of a question that had circled him for months with a patience that reminded him of no one so much as the woman who had compiled it. He had said nothing since the night he found it. He had confronted no one. He could not even explain the silence to himself, except that every road out of it ended in the same place. If he tore down the killer, the father came down with him. They were the same building, so he had done the only thing left. He had watched. Visiting every week, sitting in the warm study, drinking the tea, studying the old man across from him the way, though he did not know it. A careful woman had once studied the same man from cheap theatre seats with a notebook. He was waiting for the last play. The third play was announced 3 weeks after Vera closed. It was called Little One. The press release said it was a play about a father and a son. Conrad, in his only interview, said it was the play he had been waiting his whole life to write. The papers found that beautiful. A dying father's farewell to his son. He made one production demand, and it baffled everyone. The trilogy had played to 500 seats a night in one of the grandest houses in the city. Conrad refused it for the finale. Little One would open in a small theatre on a narrow street, a shabby, forgotten house, barely 300 seats, which it emerged Conrad had quietly owned for 20 years and never once used. He gave no reason, a dying legend's whim. You have seen that theatre before. Eli, as far as he knew, had not. The script arrived in his father's envelope, with a note in his father's hand.
For Eli.
Eli read it in one sitting, braced for a third confession. It was about a failed playwright, a man who had written a play for one actor about a lonely man who talked to an empty chair and performed it 9 times to near empty houses. It was about a kind child at a stage door on the last night who understood it. And then the playwright again, famous now, suddenly and completely and hollow inside it, alone at a small table with 2 chairs, drawing the empty one out an inch, angling it toward himself and beginning to speak to it, except that in the script the monologue is not written. Where the man's words should be, there is only a stage direction, and it is the strangest thing Conrad ever put on a page. He begins to speak. We do not hear him. At the end, the silence is interrupted by a second man entering the kitchen. The script gives him no name. He finds the playwright seated at the table and asks why he has come and what he wants. The playwright does not answer. The two men face each other across the room. There is a knife on the table. The playwright picks it up. He does not raise it, and he does not put it down. Blackout. Nothing decided. The play simply stops. There was no death in the script, no victim, no name, no crime. That was what frightened Eli most, because he had spent months learning the one true rule of his father's work. Every play was a confession, and this one, the final one, the capstone, the play his father had waited his whole life to write, appeared to confess nothing at all. Eli spent his nights in newspaper archives, looking for the body under the boards, a failed play, a small theatre, some absence that matched. He found nothing. There was nothing to find, because he was reading the play the way the world read his father, looking for a crime, when what the play was hiding was a beginning. Rehearsals began. The set was a kitchen, a spare stage kitchen, a small table, 2 chairs. At the first technical rehearsal, Eli walked out under the work lights and stopped, and stood looking at the floor a moment too long. Black and white squares. He told himself all kitchen floors look like that. He almost believed it. He recognized the gesture at the first read-through, drawing the chair out an inch, angling it toward himself, resting one hand briefly on its back. It was Vera's gesture, repeated exactly. Night after night, he sat at the table and performed the silence where the monologue should have been. Each time the chair scraped across the boards, his body braced before his mind knew why. Conrad staged the silence and defended it to the baffled director in one sentence.
Nobody listened to him. The audience shouldn't either.
The critics who attended previews called it the boldest choice of his career. The second man belonged to a fine veteran actor who rehearsed it for 6 weeks and who, on the afternoon of opening night, was thanked, paid in full, and given the truth, a dying man's last wish. An hour before curtain, Conrad came to his son's dressing room in the clothes he would wear on stage.
Tonight,
He said quietly.
I'll play the other man. I know him better than anyone.
He smiled at Eli in the mirror, and for a moment the smile was the one from every school play, every opening night, every bedside.
You'll understand everything before the curtain falls, I promise.
When the lights came up on Conrad Ashby, the audience stood. And applauded for 2 full minutes before he had spoken a single word. He let them, then he raised one hand and the theatre went quiet. The dying playwright, in his own final work, they believed they were watching a farewell, a dying father's last gift to his son. They knew they were watching theatre history. They were right. The play moved through its acts. The failed production restaged. The stage door, a small actor looking up through stage rain, repeating the words Eli had spoken 24 years earlier, while Eli, as the playwright, crouched to listen and did not know them. Then the final scene. Eli, as the playwright, famous and hollow, alone at the small table. He drew the second chair out an inch, as he had throughout rehearsals. He angled it toward himself. He rested his hand on its back. He sat and opened his mouth around the silence as staged, and out of the darkness behind him, a voice began to fill the silence. Before the next sentence came, Eli knew it. It was his father's voice, low and unhurried, speaking the monologue the script had left blank, the words the lonely man had said to the empty chair 24 years ago, to 9 near-empty houses, and the pieces began to move. A kitchen floor, black and white squares, under his own bare feet. A doorway, his hand on the frame, at the height a 5-year-old's hand rests. Voices, low, in the kitchen, where no voices should be, long after midnight. And in the kitchen, standing where no stranger should stand, a man he knew. The sad man from the theatre, the man who talked to the chair, and his own voice, glad, trusting, delighted. You came back. His father turned and saw him in the doorway. He said Eli's name once, The voice had drifted through the memory for 24 years without belonging anywhere. Now it settled here, before the heat, before the fire, before everything that came after. The man he knew stood up from the table. There was a knife in his hand. Then his father looked back at the man in the kitchen and began, in a low voice, the sentence that had always broken off in Eli's memory.
Whatever happens to me.
There the pieces ran out, 24 years, and there they had always run out. On the stage, Conrad crossed into the light and stopped across from Eli, taking the place of the second man in the script. He spoke the written lines calmly, asking why the playwright had come and what he wanted. And then, very quietly, he spoke a line that was in no script, that had been in no rehearsal, that the prompt book did not contain.
Whatever happens to me, don't let my boy see it.
300 people heard a beautiful line of theatre. One man on that stage understood that it was not written. It was quoted. Eli had carried the first half of that sentence his whole life, filed under fire. His father had kept the rest and had just returned it, completed, in front of everyone. There was nothing left to doubt. This is the true order of Eli Ashby's first memory. The stranger was in the house before there was any fire. The boy woke and came down and greeted him, because the boy had liked him. His father saw his son in the doorway and spent his last words on him. The fire came after, built, not suffered, to take the house, the truth, and everything but the boy. The passerby was never passing by. The rescue was real, and every detail of it was true, and it was the second half of the crime. A boy had understood him, once, for a moment, in the rain, then walked away, holding two hands, and did not come back. Nothing about the memory was false, except what it meant. Eli did not break. He felt all of it. 24 years arriving in a single spoken sentence, and he let none of it spill over the edges, because that was the one thing his father had built into him, that not even this could burn down. The play went on, he went on with it. But the world had begun to leave. The audience disappeared first, then the theatre. The light narrowed until there was no stage, no play, no city, no year, only a kitchen table and two men facing each other across it. Eli stood where Conrad had stood 24 years earlier. Conrad had taken the place of the man he had killed. The man who had murdered Eli's parents, raised him, loved him, and shaped him, was not afraid. The knife was already in Eli's hand, where the script had put it at every rehearsal. It was not weightless now. He looked at his son the way he had once listened to a boy in the rain, entirely present, and said, in a voice that carried to the last row and was meant for one person,
You know what comes next.
He drove the knife in. The audience rose to its feet. The play ends in a blackout. In the dark, with 300 people on their feet beyond the curtain line, Eli knelt beside the man on the stage floor. Conrad was breathing, barely. His hand found his son's wrist, as it had on the edge of a child's bed. Smoke was already rising from beneath the stage.
Go. Now you're safe.
The same words. 24 years earlier, this man had carried him out of a fire and told him not to look. Eli stood up, and he looked at the stage, at the smoke, at the costume, at the table with its two chairs, the second still drawn out an inch, still angled, still waiting, at the man dying in the center of his own final scene, exactly where he had spent his whole life telling the truth, the only place he ever told it. He looked at all of it, for as long as the heat allowed. Then he walked out, through the wings, past the fleeing crew, out the stage door into the narrow street, on his own 2 feet, carried by no one. The knife was still in his hand. He had carried it from the stage without noticing. Conrad had owned the theatre for 20 years, since the night Eli first found him in it, and had let no one alter it. He knew its wiring its hidden spaces, and how fast it would burn. This was the last thing Conrad composed, not a death, an erasure. The same patience he had spent on Vera, spent now on himself. A fire to take the stage, the costume, the wound, the truth, and him, and give the world back nothing but ash and a finished legend. Everyone got out. The fire curtain bought the house time, the alarms did the rest, the audience stood in the rain and watched the building go. None of it was luck. Conrad had planned the evacuation as carefully as the fire. A theatre full of victims would be questioned for years. A theatre that emptied safely, leaving one dying legend behind, would preserve the story he wanted the world to believe. Everyone got out except the man on the stage. The investigation lasted months and found no certainty. Conrad's remains were badly damaged, and the injury seen on stage could not be separated cleanly from everything the fire had done. No weapon was recovered from the building, and every witness believed the knife had been a prop. And the one person who knew the difference said nothing. Eli could have spoken in the street, in the rain, to the first person who reached him. He could have said the words that would have turned an accident into something else. He had the truth in his mouth and the whole night in front of him to say it. He let it burn. He died as he lived, the obituaries said, in a theatre. They ran for days. The genius, the hero of that long-ago fire, the devoted father, the son who had escaped 2 fires in one lifetime, as though surviving them made him fortunate. Eli read none of it. 3 weeks after the funeral, a solicitor's envelope arrived. Inside was Conrad's confession, the novelist, Vera, the names the world knew and the ones it never would, the stage door, the weeks he spent watching Eli's family through their kitchen window, and the choice he did not call a decision. He called it a conclusion. There was one enclosure, a photograph taken from the house before the fire and kept for 24 years. A young man and woman stood together in their kitchen, caught in the middle of an ordinary evening. A black and white floor under their feet, exactly where his memory had kept it. Eli was seeing his parents' faces for the first time since he was 5. He returned the photograph to the envelope. Then he opened the drawer where Vera's folder lay. He placed the knife beside it. Conrad's confession joined them, and Eli closed the drawer. Later that night, Eli drew the second chair out an inch and sat down across from it. He began to speak. We do not hear him.